This is the Crowdcrux Crowdfunding Podcast with Sal Briggman, where we cover everything you need to know to launch a successful crowdfunding campaign. We speak with proven entrepreneurs who've raised money from the crowd and want to teach you how to do the same. Stay tuned because we're about to reveal how to launch your dream project with your host, Sal Briggman.
Before we get started with this podcast episode, I want to take a second to introduce you to my friends at Fulfillrite. If you need help shipping out your Kickstarter or Indiegogo perks or rewards, Fulfillrite is the absolute best company for you. I've been working with them for a while and I can vouch for their services. They make it dead simple and take all of the headache out of shipping out all of those boxes, all of those orders to your backers and your customers. If you want to check them out, go to fulfillrite.com at fulfillrite.com. Hey, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. My name is Salvador Briggman, and on this show, we dedicate an intensive 40 minutes, sometimes an intensive hour, to really dissecting a campaign and why it was successful. That's my whole goal with this show, is to kind of get to the crux of the levers that you need to pull if you want to not just hit your goal, but also surpass it on Kickstarter, on Indiegogo, if you're doing an equity campaign, lots of different types of crowdfunding, doing a nonprofit fundraiser. I want to find out, learning from these guests, it's partially for me, but also for you, is what they are doing right, what's happening behind the scenes, and how you can replicate this, and you can do this exact same thing. We live in a great time where we have social media, we have the internet, we have a fundraising mechanism like Kickstarter, you have the ability to make high quality video, and you can kind of combine all of this together to, number one, create an ask, to create a project, to create something that you can show other people and they can see that you're actually freaking serious about whatever it is that you're trying to do. But number two, if you have a successful campaign, you can actually build a community out of that. You can have people who are following you that support your next campaign and your next campaign. And it's so cool to me that we live in a time where this is possible. And I think that the only thing you got to do, honestly, is aside from listening and educating yourself a little bit or grabbing a copy of my book, The Kickstarter Launch Formula, on Audible. That link is crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. I figure I'll mention that while I'm going down this train. But aside from doing these things, the only other thing you got to do, man, is you got to take action. You just have to start putting together a project page. You have to start thinking about the video. You have to put together the reward tiers. The more that you, number one, educate yourself, but number two, start taking action, the faster you're going to get results. And also, maybe you end up failing, but a lot of these creators, they'll come on this podcast and tell you that they maybe failed at their first campaign and even their second, but their third one ended up raising 5 figures on Kickstarter. The next one ended up raising 6 figures, and it goes up from there. Some people have an immediate out-of-the-gate success where they do $500,000 or $1 million with a crowdfunding campaign. It really varies, but there's a great saying out there that rather than trying to avoid losing, you have to play to win. And sometimes playing to win is just taking lots of action. Not everything works out, but you find the one or two things that do. And that's really all that you need, honestly, in business, is to get one hit. And then all of a sudden you have a massive tribe, a massive community, a product that's selling, and you're in business before you know it. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode. It's coming up right after this. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Today we are privileged to be speaking with an independent creator who's actually from the publishing category on Kickstarter, ran a massive campaign, more than 700 backers, over $165,000 raised, and he came on the show to share a little bit of backstory there as how they actually did this, and also some of the stuff that they've learned from this particular project. Samuel, welcome to the show.
Hello, my name is Sam Podansky, and thanks for having me on.
Could you give the listeners just a bite-sized idea of the project that you ran here and kind of what inspired you, honestly, even to go with crowdfunding?
Sure. This project is actually very unique and kind of special for essentially taking a long series of books, Japanese novels that had been translated into English and released as ebooks, and actually making a print edition of those ebooks. The series is over 34 volumes long, and it's still being published in Japan. And we at J Novel Club, which is the company that I run, we published them as ebooks, and we ran this Kickstarter campaign basically as a thank you to the fans who had stuck with this series for over 10 years. Actually, it's the 10th year anniversary of the series in Japan, and we ran this campaign to give them the opportunity to actually own it in physical books.
Now, did you create the series? Did you buy the rights to the series? What was sort of your involvement there?
Sure. So J Novel Club, as a business, what we do is we go to the Japanese publishers and we buy rights to what are called light novels. It's a type of novel in Japan, or usually a series of novels in Japan, which target the same audience as anime and manga, except they're novels. So they're mostly just text. And we've licensed over 70 titles. We put out 350 volumes as ebooks, etc. And earlier this year, we started doing physical books as well. So actually printing them. Our books are in Barnes & Nobles and other major stores. We're a full book publisher, essentially. But like you said, Rokujouma, this particular series is published by a publisher in Japan called Hobby Japan, and we licensed the series about 2.5 years ago when it was actually only up to volume 23, and we continued translating the volumes from 24. Volumes 1 through 23 actually had already been translated by a fan and released online as an illegal fan translation. And what we did actually, which was really special, is we actually contacted the fan translator and then hired them to do the rest of the series officially, and got the rights to their fan translations for the first 23 volumes, and actually got them essentially legitimized by the Japanese publisher. So they officially recognize them as the official translation, and then we've been selling them as ebooks as well after re-editing them. So we had this really crazy project with this fan base that had been around for almost a decade, and a super dedicated originally fan translator and now professional translator. And we really wanted to take all the fan base really wanted was to actually own this series in a nice print set. And it provided an opportunity for us to say, well, okay, if to answer your other question, why did we turn to Kickstarter? The answer is that it's a small fan base, and it's a really, really long series. So Barnes & Nobles is never going to buy 35 volumes and just stick them on a shelf. It would take an entire shelf. Right. Yeah. And they just the audience isn't big enough to do a full print run on these. Like usually we print 5,000 copies, but here even the ebook sales didn't really show us that there was really that many fans out there. On the other hand, there are like 1,000, pretty hardcore fans of Rokujouma, and we thought, well, if we could get them all to pledge a certain amount of money, then we could fund a print run of all 33 volumes, maybe like 1,000 copies each. And that's still 33,000 books. Or what we ended up doing is actually combining them into 10 essentially collections. So it's still 100. There's still 10,000 books that we have to print, and that's a decent amount of money. And
that's definitely a lot there. One of the questions I had for you here is, when it comes to your sort of background, is this something that is popular in San Antonio? Because it seems to me like it's a very kind of niche thing, almost within a genre of Japanese content itself. How did you personally get interested in this?
Well, my location in San Antonio is just irrelevant. It's where I moved back. I actually lived in Japan for almost 12 years, and I just moved back in December, and this is near where my family is, so I decided to move back to Texas. But the company is worldwide, really. We have staff and everybody around the world, especially translators and editors. We have an office in Portland, Oregon, which is our main office of business. But as for how I got into light novels specifically, I was actually working in the anime and manga fields in Japan as a translator, and I noticed that this third rung of the anime manga industry, which has been basically underserved in the English community. There weren't that many publishers that were publishing these types of books, and essentially a lot of anime and manga are actually based off of these novels, and they're adaptations of novels, just how like Game of Thrones is a adaptation of the books, right? And what would have happened if, for example, Game of Thrones had come out on HBO, but the books were only available in Polish or something? Well, someone would probably go out there online and translate them into English and upload them somewhere, right?
Yeah, seems like a no-brainer. Yeah.
Right, because it's such, because people want to know what the original story, the source material, and that's essentially what was happening with a whole lot of anime that were based off light novels.
Interesting.
And I saw this about 4 years ago, and about 3.5 years ago, and I started building this company to license and translate these books officially into English. At first, we just did ebooks because it's difficult to get a publisher off the ground. But now we've actually started doing physical books as well. So that's really the motivation I had, was actually seeing the rise of some fan translation in the market and how popular they were getting, and how poorly they were translated in many cases. A lot of people would just throw the Japanese into Google Translate or something, and we did, like, the real professional translation, like, they could be so much better. So we really jumped into the market there, and it was a great opportunity. And now we've really grown the market for these light novels considerably over the past 3 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just got back from a trip to Peru, and I remember trying to put stuff into Google Translate. It's just like, it would not be good, I think, even for Japanese.
Yeah,
it's probably some weird aberration.
Imagine trying to do it with actual prose and it's good writing. It does not work.
Yeah, I can imagine, man. One of the things I was kind of wondering is, like, when it comes to publishing a book, you've done a few of these now. You've done the ebooks. How is this different doing a Kickstarter campaign with a traditional kind of, I guess, launch that you might do, or like unveiling of your other kind of work?
Yeah, actually, so the run-up marketing to this Kickstarter campaign was done very deliberately and slowly. We announced that we would be doing a Kickstarter campaign back in July at one of the largest events in anime and manga. It's a convention called Anime Expo in Los Angeles, and we announced it as like the final announcement at our panel, and it got a lot of good buzz. And then we started sort of teasing the date of the Kickstarter and when it was going to happen, and then some of the things like how high the goal was going to be and what we're going to be. And we released like one or two of the specs about how the books were going to look and such. During that entire period of time, that was about 3 months or almost 4 months, I think. Well, we started at the beginning of October and it was in July. So August, September, basically 2.5 months. We spent that time very carefully sketching out the plan, the goals, the tiers, the stretch goals. And one thing that is fairly unique about our Kickstarter is we had to get all of this approved by Japan ahead of time. And that is actually something which is unique to our Kickstarter, which I don't think other Kickstarters have to deal with. But every single bonus item, every single thing that the author or the illustrator would have to produce for us, how many signatures on the books, for example, signed copies, or in this case, signed shikishi, they're actually signing like a separate Japanese signature board. How many of those would they have to produce, and the budget for that, and of course, just getting how many royalties the Japanese company are going to get out of the Kickstarter funds, for example. All of those needed to be approved ahead of time, and so we had a lot of back and forth with the Japanese publishing company, and then they talked with the author, etc., to make sure that was all set really well before we actually even launched the campaign.
Yeah, and to make sure you actually have rewards that people are going to be interested in. I can imagine, that's a lot of back and forth. That's a lot of making sure you sort of dot your I's and cross your T's with all of that.
One other crucial thing about how we set up the project is that I mean, I've read the series actually, but I'm not, a super fan myself. I love it series. I'm a fan, but I'm not one of those people who's been reading it for the past decade, right? And what I did is I brought in one of those fans who actually is also just generally a fan of our company, and actually he is the Kickstarter project manager, essentially, and he made sure that all of our descriptions were, correct and in character with the novel, and he gave us a lot of marketing ideas for the newsletters, the updates, for example. And at the same time, I also employed a marketing person who has a lot of experience with Kickstarter. She actually helped run a Kickstarter that earned over $1 million in the visual novel space a couple of years back. So she knew all about how to, the Kickstarter systems and making graphics and how to actually, look like a professional Kickstarter, if you know what I mean by that. But
yeah, totally.
The look is important just to sort of give yourself legitimacy, even if it's a known core fan base like we have.
Yeah, and being consistent with your brand and sort of telling that story and giving people the experience that they want. What do you attribute your almost pretty much instantly the first day hitting your goal and doing so well in those first 3 days? What do you attribute that to? Was that, you think, going and attending these conventions? Was it you already had an email list or social media following? What do you attribute that to?
Well, so we know that there's a group of fans of the series that are somewhere between, it's about 1,000 people, I'd say. And the question is, though, we didn't really know exactly how many people it was. Was it 500 people? Was it 1,000 people? And furthermore, we didn't really know how many of them were such big fans that they would drop $250 on a full set of these books. That's one other thing that was a sort of a question mark for us when we did this series. It's 10 large, like 600-page books, and each one, retails for $25. It's really $29.99, but they'll pay $25 for it. And so basically the minimum tier that actually got you the primary reward, which is the 10 collections of the volumes 1 through 33 or 1 through 31. Those we didn't know how many of those fans would be willing to just drop that kind of cash on a Kickstarter like that.
Yeah, it was a big question mark.
It's a big question mark there. It's like it's one thing to count how many fans there are, which I had an okay estimate of that. The question is, how passionate were these fans really, and how would they put in the money for it? And we didn't really know. But once we opened up the pledges, it was pretty obvious that there were at least 250. Basically, that first day got 250 people, no, a little more than that, but 250 people essentially to pledge over $250. Our
incredible.
Our average pledge has never really dropped below about 240. So almost all of the people who pledge are pledging for the full complete set. One thing that also helped, I think, with the very first day pledges, we had those early birds that basically gave, instead of $300 for the full set plus all the bonus items, it was only $275. And they were limited to, I think, that was limited to 100. And we had even some higher tiers, which were limited to 10 or 5 that include signatures. And the limitation of the early birds, which gave you extra discount, basically means that those got taken up really, really quickly. And I think that motivated people to just go ahead and drop the money because they knew that, like, hey, this will save me $25 if I do it now, as opposed to wait to the end. About 250 people basically pledged the first day and a half, and we blew through our initial goal, blew through our first stretch goal, which is boxes for the books. It was pretty crazy. So the passion of the fans is really what did it. We didn't have to get the word out, actually. Like, these fans all knew each other. They were anticipating it. We had already sent out news to our newsletter. We have a newsletter which has about 12,000 people on it from our normal business, and we also did social media on Twitter. It was very important actually for getting the word out with these fans, and we even did some astroturfing on 4chan, because I don't want to get into that, but there's a group of Rokujouma fans who are actually sort of on 4chan/A, if you're familiar with that. And they actually made sure that they were aware of the Kickstarter going on at the time too, and a lot of them did pledge.
Did you announce all of the stretch goals in the beginning of the campaign, or did you sort of announce them as you went?
Well, so the interesting thing about the stretch goals, the initial plan was to have 4 stretch goals, a box of the books, digital drama CDs, an additional book called 4 Seasons, and then physical drama CDs were essentially the 4 stretch goals. However, during our negotiations with Japan, the third stretch goal, this extra book called 4 Seasons, which was originally produced as a DVD bonus item with the anime series that was made for this series back like 7 years ago, it turns out that the rights for that book are basically in limbo and impossible to obtain. So we had to kill that stretch goal before we launched, and so we launched with 3 stretch goals.
Okay.
However, it became pretty obvious after about 6 hours that we were going to need another stretch goal. And so I went back to Japan and started negotiating with them and brainstorming to figure out what we could do as a replacement for a final stretch goal, essentially. And it took a long time because these sorts of negotiations, especially creating something new that would involve the author or the illustrator, right? That they have time and schedules to be concerned about, and we have to figure out what the budget is. It took about 2.5 weeks really to get that done. But about midway through the campaign, we added on a final stretch goal at, I think it was $125,000, and that really did help turn the pace of the pledges up again. I don't know if you were looking at our kick track or something, but you can tell that they're around about 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, I see you starting to get a better uptick there with those.
Yeah, and then it plateaus again at 125,000 as we approach that final stretch goal. But then after that, it's just to the races. So it really actually helped push extra people to pledge around midway through the doldrums of normal halfway through campaign doldrums, and so it was really important. Now, we didn't do that on purpose. We were trying to get that stretch goal out there as fast as we possibly could, but I think it actually might be. I mean, it's always a good strategy, especially for successful campaigns that have already blown through their most of their stretch goals before the midway of the
project
campaign. Yeah. If you can throw in an extra stretch goal around there, not something that's like something that'll definitely make it. Like that's would be my advice here. Don't throw in $1 million stretch goal just to get people to up their pledges and for some pipe dream that'll never happen. Throw in a reasonable stretch goal that they'll hit like a week or maybe 10 days before the end of the campaign, because the normal end of the campaign boost will happen anyway. But it's really just the running start that you need before that, which really helps.
When you went to Japan, is Kickstarter something that they are familiar with there? Is it have big reception there, or is it still kind of like we're not really sure about crowdfunding? What was the reception with in Japan about crowdfunding and what you were doing?
Well, that's like a 2-hour podcast if you want to talk all about that. Very briefly, Kickstarter has not taken off in Japan very much. And they had a couple of their own homegrown crowdfunding sites. One called, I think, Campfire, and Indiegogo is a little bit stronger over there as opposed to Kickstarter. Kickstarter was the first, and they kind of messed up the marketing in Japan. Some Japanese people tried to do crowdfunding, but in Japan, socially, asking other people for money like that is looked down upon, right? It's looked on as begging, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so companies, especially creators and companies both, looked at Kickstarter and crowdfunding as sort of I wouldn't say uncouth, but it was a bad look for them, for any creator or to turn to that kind of thing. And that perception was really strong about 10 years ago, maybe about 8 years ago when Kickstarter was blowing up. And so Japan basically did not get on the crowdfunding bandwagon at all. And some of the other websites like Campfire that they created themselves did a much better job at marketing to Japan, where to make it seem not so much that it was like asking for money so much as it was you're paying, you're pre-ordering something.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Yeah, it's a different kind of feel towards the way you're engaging with the platform.
And on the other hand, Kickstarter tries like the opposite. Like they don't want Kickstarter to be a glorified pre-order platform, whereas in Japan, like marketing that way actually is sort of important to get people to pledge. It's interesting differences in culture there.
One of the recurring themes that I've had with a lot of different guests on this show is sort of that mid-campaign slump and not really knowing what to do during that middle kind of when you're losing momentum, you're not getting as many pledges and as many backers. What was your attempts there to kind of combat that? And do you have any thoughts on that? I gotta introduce you to a killer resource, The Gadget Flow. Their website reaches more than 28 million people per month. Brands like DJI, HP, and Pioneer have used them to increase awareness and boost sales, along with more than 4,000 crowdfunding campaigns. They have a new unboxing series on YouTube where you can get your product unboxed by a tech expert. Lastly, you can get feedback for your crowdfunding campaign and increase conversions by using Crowd Insight. You can check them out at thegadgetflow.com.
Yeah, so our we came up with a strategy for the entire campaign before the campaign started. We had a schedule, an update schedule. We had pre-rendered graphics at each of the points, like 50% funded, 60% funded. Of course, we ended up skipping all of those, but but we can say like only 13 days left, those sorts of things. And another thing that really helped that we did is we did, like, for our series, we have this series has a bunch of characters, a bunch of girls. There's actually 9 of them. It's there's one guy and 9 girls. They're all cool, superpowered aliens or underground dwellers. Anyway, each of the girls is pretty cool, and so we ran a character poll. Which is your favorite character kind of thing. And we did that about week 1, and then we announced the results in like week 2. And we did another thing where we collected questions for the author, and then we translated them to Japanese and sent to the author, and he answered them and revealed. We did an update with the author's answers about stuff where he actually revealed some cool insider information and things like that. So, and then the last thing I mentioned already is, like, we added on this extra stretch goal that really helped sort of refuel a little bit of the momentum that we had in the very beginning, which was really cool. We did, in addition to the extra stretch goal, we also added a new tier. At the $750 level, which you're thinking, oh, that's pretty crazy, but it actually did, like, the nature of the tier was pretty cool. It essentially was a new reward where the author would write you a little mini, like, story, like 2-page story on any character or like scenario you want.
And you got 10 backers at that tier.
Limited to 10, because, like, the author doesn't have infinite amount of time. But the author actually, during our negotiations about the new stretch goal, the author suggested this and said, hey, I'd be happy to write some extra little bonus stories for people to say thank you. And we were like, hell yeah. And that actually spurned on just a lot of people, even if they didn't pledge $750, a lot of people were just saying, well, if I had this level, I'd want them to write about this. And, and that kind of got the community talking and thinking about it, and just kept the momentum up, really. So those sorts of things were, I mean, there's really nothing else more you can do. Obviously, you have your mailing list, you have your community that is interested, but you've already emailed them by the the middle part of the campaign. So you need to add something new in there to get people to pay attention again, whether it's a new tier, a new pledge, some kind of info from the creators or designers, an interview, that kind of thing. Just keep people engaged.
So you have a lot of experience when it comes to understanding Japanese culture, understanding how to get the rights for some of these sort of mini books. And how does this compare, this campaign, to the other kinds of launches that you've done? Do you wish you had done a Kickstarter for these other publications that you're putting out, or are going to continue to do them? Just kind of curious there about that.
That's a very good question. Our model and the way light novels are published in Japan are serials, so they're long series. Not most of them are not as long as Rokujouma. I think Rokujouma is one of the longest light novel series, like, in history, actually. However, most of them do run 6, 7, 8 volumes, sometimes a decent amount more. But we license them while the books are still being written, right, in Japan. So it feels to me like, now, Rokujouma actually, even though the books are still being written in Japan, the main story basically finishes around volume 29, and then there's like 2 extra books that we're including in the Kickstarter afterwards that kind of are like a coda to the series. So we felt it was okay to just do a Kickstarter for those just the first 33 volumes. That's all. but the other series, they're really like, when they end, and we don't really know when they're going to end. And by the time they end, if we haven't licensed them in the first place, it's almost too late, right?
Oh, I see. Because
there will be fan translations. The people want these as soon as they come out in Japan, and they come out in Japan every 3 months, every 4 months, sometimes every year. Doing a Kickstarter, you can't do a Kickstarter to license books that don't exist, right? What if the author dies or doesn't want to write them, or the Japanese publisher decides to cancel them? So, we can't really do that. You can only do it for a specific, well-defined group of books. And that's why Kickstarter for our other series maybe, especially the licensing itself from the beginning, is definitely not a good model. On the other hand, print editions of books that we've only put out as ebooks, like we did with Rokujouma, actually, that can work in theory, especially if the series has like just finished, for example, or something, and there's enough of the fans that I think would pay the money for it ahead of time. The problem actually with there is Japan's general reluctance about using crowdfunding to begin with.
Yes, yeah.
So like the fact that we're doing this with Rokujouma was my idea, and I pitched it to the company in Japan. And although we announced it in July, I had been negotiating with them about this for almost 4 months. So it took a long time.
So this actually made me think of a question that I was going to ask you before. So just to circle back there, I was looking at where your backers were coming from, and majority are coming from obviously United States, Canada, UK, pretty I would say similar to other projects. Did you miss out, you think, on Japanese backers, or were people just backing it from this location? Or what are your thoughts on that so much of your audience, it seems like, is a little bit not as into crowdfunding, but you were still able to have a successful campaign, and a lot of people in the US seem to really get behind it?
Well, to address your first question, we sort of specifically did not target Japan. The Japanese publishing company themselves, of course, would want to have a lot more control about any product that's sort of sold in Japan, even though we have worldwide English rights. And these books are obviously in English, the English translation. There are some of the perks, for example, like the $1,000 tier includes actually a party at the publisher in Japan, and we were wondering, well, there might be some Japanese fans who would pledge for that just so they could meet the author and stuff. But it turns out that there weren't, and I think that was somewhat by design. However, the Japanese publisher company is looking at our success and thinking to themselves, hey, maybe we could do a Japan only or mostly Japan, targeted crowdfunding campaign as well, and then similar things would happen in Japan.
That's what I would think.
Fans,
yeah,
the fans worldwide are whether it's Japanese fans of the series or worldwide fans of the series are very similar. I think it's a little bit misconception about Japanese fans are so much different than Western fans, and it's not really true. So I think that they're thinking about that right now. However, I don't want to say anything public about any of the possibilities that might happen.
Yeah, totally.
As for the second thing about sort of attracting people who are not normally Kickstarter backers, we did get a lot of comments like, this is the second Kickstarter I've ever backed, or this is the first Kickstarter I've ever backed, things like that. And well, it's not that surprising because we're taking a pre-existing fan base, a pre-existing fandom, essentially, and we're introducing them to crowdfunding through Kickstarter, not so much the other way around, right? I think a lot of projects, their Kickstarter backers or their fans, and those people are getting introduced to this person's creation or this person's invention or this new game or something, and because the game itself hasn't been created. And that's the fundamental, I think, difference about our Kickstarter versus most others, is that we're actually kickstarting a product which is already fully created, right? Mm-hmm. What we're really doing is we're kickstarting a different medium for it. In this case, print books.
Yeah.
So it has a 10-year history. Like what other IPs on Kickstarter have been around for 10 years? That's also why, for example, things like board games are so successful when they're like board games of a successful property, for example, that are licensed. I know I've seen a number of those. Like I didn't, Dark Souls board game was a huge Kickstarter, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And of course, so those benefit from the fan base, from the fandom that exists from an already successful IP. And it's not really good advice for people who are thinking about kickstarting things, because most of them don't have that kind of benefit. And we did, even though it's not anything compared to a Dark Souls or a Game of Thrones, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very small, little niche fandom, but it's still there, and that's what really drove our Kickstarter.
Yeah, and it was it's a very successful campaign, and congratulations on it. I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all of these great tips and advice, and particularly for me, the team building element you kind of touched on in the beginning really resonated with me, of surrounding yourself with the right people. It sounds like that's also why you've been successful, honestly, in business here. And I also just want to say thank you for introducing crowdfunding to the Japanese consumer, to people around the world. I think the more that people see individuals like you being successful, the more likely they're willing to adopt crowdfunding and see it as not necessarily a donation thing, but as coming out with something really cool and giving people a different experience, a different buying experience. So thank you for that. And where can people go to learn a little bit more about some of the other stuff you might be coming out with, and if you do another campaign?
Yeah, well, just go to our website, j-novel.club. And you can see all of the books that we publish, and we have a subscription service. I didn't even get into all that. Or just go to Amazon and type in j-novel.club and see, or j-novel space club, and you'll see all of our books that we're publishing. We've got Japanese light novels for days. We have published now over 300 volumes. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, feel free to check us out.
Incredible, man. Sam, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing all these great tips. And if you have another campaign, we'd be happy to have you back.
All right, thank you very much.
Shipping and mailing from your desk has never been simpler than with SendPro Online from Pitney Bowes. With SendPro Online, it's just click, send, and save for as low as $4.99. That's $4.99 a month. Schedule package pickups and track shipments from departure to arrival. And for being a CrowdCrux listener, you'll receive a free 30-day trial to get started and a free 10-pound scale to ensure that you'll never overpay. Just go to pb.com/CrowdCrux to access this special offer for a free 30-day trial plus a free 10-pound scale to get started. That's pb.com/CrowdCrux to experience shipping made simple with a free trial of SendPro Online from Pitney Bowes. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. This is your host, Salvador Briggman. I hope that you took a lot away from today's podcast episode. You found it to be informative and helpful, and you have some idea of what you got to do going forward. You also maybe took some notes, and you have a sense at least of, okay, I feel like I can pull this off. Okay, I know what I got to do. I think that knowledge is power, not necessarily because, when you know something, you can do it. Like, obviously that's power, but it also gives me personally so much confidence when I know what to expect, when I have a sense of how things might go in the future, when I know what to do, for example, going into the gym and knowing what to do with exercise machines, or writing and knowing where I'm going with the paragraph and these types of things. I have way more confidence. I have so much more confidence when I know what I'm doing. And when I don't know what I'm doing, I feel always very lost. I feel always very uncertain. And I just feel like I don't know what I don't know. You know what I mean? I think I don't know if I'm making sense here, but if that resonates with you, that you don't want to feel uncertain and you want more confidence in your life, particularly as it pertains to this project and this crowdfunding campaign, I can actually help you there, because I have so many years of looking over campaigns, having a very trained eye when it comes to what's working, what's not, and all the red flags. And it takes me seconds, literally, to see what's working and what's not with a campaign and how to fix it. And also, if you're just starting, what you have to do if you want to improve your campaign. So just take advantage of my knowledge. Book a one-on-one coaching call with me. I can take a look at your campaign. We can do an intensive hour-long coaching session, getting really nitty-gritty with your project. I can give you feedback if you want on your different marketing elements. We can talk about your strategy going forward, things you should be doing, things maybe you're not aware of. Like I said, you don't know what you don't know. So that's really what I've designed the coaching sessions to be for. If you're interested, you can book a one-on-one coaching call with me at crowdcrux.com/coaching. That link is crowdcrux.com/coaching. crowdcrux.com/coaching. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I will see you next time.